Welcome and thank you for joining us on the occasion of the prize-giving ceremony of the 11th cycle of the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. Since 1980, the award's prize-giving ceremonies have been the culmination of the 3-year cycles. It's a process that identifies projects of excellence, evaluates them, and entrusts the master jury to select the award recipients. This year, some 400 nominees were assessed. 19 were shortlisted by the jury, and for the first time, the shortlist was honored by being made public. Tonight, we present the 5 final awards. The 10 previous award ceremonies have been held in places celebrated for the value of the architecture, whether historic monuments or contemporary buildings. These sites have in common their significance and value to the development of architecture in the Islamic world. Among them have been the Shalimar Gardens in Lahore, Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, the Citadel of Cairo, Registan Ensemble in Samarkand, and the Alhambra in Granada. Today we have the privilege of holding the 11th award ceremony in the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha, an important institution for Muslim cultures and an architectural masterpiece, witness to the testimony of a nation's commitment to art and culture. We are further privileged to be in the gracious presence of His Highness the Emir and Her Highness Sheikh Moza bin Nasser. Thank you. We here are today to celebrate the efforts of men and women who, by their determination, creativity, and vision, have contributed through architecture and teaching in building a better future for the generations to come.
Aga Khan Prize for Architecture is very unique because it's an international prize, but linked to a civilization, linked to specificities.
It really promotes pluralism in architecture and looks for radically different scales and types of excellence in architecture.
It almost doesn't matter what the scale of the project is. What matters is the imaginative scope that the architectural team was able to find in a project.
As well as buildings, it recognizes process. And it brings forward architects who are not internationally known.
I think its real strength is its eclecticism, that it takes such a generous, open-minded interpretation of communities, whether it's geographically, in religious terms and in cultural terms.
For over 3 decades, the Aga Khan Award for Architecture has served to recognise and inspire architectural excellence in the Muslim world. Bestowed every 3 years, the award has built a formidable reputation as perhaps the most coveted prize in its field, a reputation rooted in the depth and rigour of the selection process.
I was in jury in many cases, in America, in Europe, in Asia. And I think the Aga Khan Award is a process, I would say, is the most serious and most productive.
As ever, the jury had a tough task in choosing from among the hundreds of nominated projects.
The rigorous process after the shortlisting, which involve technical reports based on field visits. In the process, you learn that there are certain projects that you may have admired. They fail in responding to new demands, such as sensitivity to sustainability.
This year, for the first time, the award has encompassed projects from outside what would traditionally be seen as the Muslim world.
We have a project in Spain, we have a project in China, and for me the biggest message is that it's a global situation, and architecture, if it's good for everybody.
Over the decades, the award ceremony has been held in some of the world's most prestigious venues, including the Alhambra Palace in Spain, Humayun's tomb in India, and the Petronas Towers in Malaysia. The Doha Museum of Islamic Art is a worthy addition to that list. fitting surroundings for a celebration of architectural excellence, and in which to honour the 5 winners of this year's Aga Khan Award.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Your Highness the Emir, Your Highness Sheikh Ramoza bin Nasser, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. What a pleasure it is to greet this wonderful audience, including so many friends, old and new, who have helped shape this program and who are so essential to its future. I'm especially pleased to salute Their Highnesses the Emir of Qatar and Sheikh Ramoza. We are honored by your presence and grateful for your inspiring example as you embrace this country's proud heritage while also pointing it boldly to the future. It is hard for me to believe that this awards process is now a third of a century old, and that it has involved some 3,500 candidate projects and over 100 prize recipients. As we complete the 11th cycle, I am delighted to extend to all our recipients my warmest congratulations. The awarding of prizes is in the spotlight tonight, and deservedly so. But the prizes themselves are only the tip of a larger iceberg. The awards program also includes a wide array of seminars, exhibitions, lectures, publications, and a highly decentralized selection process. This ceremony, in short, marks the culmination of a long and lively conversation. Many of you will remember my personal concern back in the mid-1970s that this conversation was scarcely even taking place. Discussion and debate about the built environment in the Islamic world was then a very thin proposition. The continuity of Islamic architecture had sadly lapsed, weakened by the heavy hand of colonialization, by modernization and globalization, by the lack of architectural training in Islamic contexts, and even by the development of new construction materials in the industrialized world. The result was a paucity both of indigenous architects and of foreign architects working with distinction in the Islamic settings and idioms. This situation was particularly troubling given the powerful history of Islamic architecture, and given, too, the struggle many Muslims faced in expressing proud cultural identities in contexts where they very often had little influence. Historically, the arts, including architecture, have taken their principal inspiration from religious faith. But when art is separated from faith-based roots, other influences can dominate, including soulless technology and empty secularization. At that time, I used the term vacuum to describe the Islamic architectural scene. The initial goal of our awards program was to replace that vacuum with an energized debate. Was there a problem? How could it be addressed? By whom? And in what settings? Notice that we did not seek then, nor do we now, the advancement of some definitive aesthetic style or the promulgation, as one colleague put it, of some manifesto of architectural intent. What we cared most about was that relevant questions be raised and that a broad range of constituents be engaged in discussing them. 3 decades later, we can claim considerable progress stimulated by this award and other endeavors with similar goals. We've come a long way from a careless confidence that the built environment would somehow take care of itself. We're increasingly aware that the quality of our buildings can transform the quality of our lives, both spiritual and material. We have only to look around us tonight to see how things have changed. This Museum of Islamic Art itself represents one of the high-profile accomplishments in global architecture in recent years. It symbolizes how contemporary international talent at the highest level can join creatively with ancient cultural inheritance and visionary national leadership. This museum represents a commitment we have seen elsewhere in Doha, from the development of the Qatar National Museum, one of our first prize recipients in 1980, to the reconstruction of the Souk Waqif, one of 19 prize finalists this year, to the striking new structures of Education City. And the progress we see in Qatar now is echoed through much of the Islamic world. How much the Arkan Awards have contributed to this story is for others to judge. But I do believe that our recipients, through the years, have provided inspiring examples of architectural excellence. But what comes next? As we look to the future, let me mention 4 principal areas of concern. The Islamic environment of our work, its relevant constituencies, the shifting social and economic scene, and the impact of new technologies. My first concern is with the cultural context of our work. Why should we emphasize an Islamic approach to architecture? Our master jury, in responding to this question, has described how global forces now threaten the values of memory, heritage, and belonging, and how the built environment can help meet that challenge. This is why these triennial celebrations take place in settings that evoke Islamic tradition, and why most of our award juries have thereby emphasized, among the other criteria, the restoration and reutilization of historic buildings. Great icons of the past must not be allowed to disappear without an opportunity to come back to life and serve the future. At the same time, in looking at the places we have met and the projects we have honored, we also see enormous diversity. But diversity, in fact, is part of the essence of Islam. The unity of the Ummah does not imply sameness. Working in an Islamic context need not confine us to constraining models. Nor does respecting the past mean copying the past. Indeed, if we hold too fast to what is past, we run the risk of crushing that inheritance. The best way to honor the past is to seize the future. In sum, an Islamic architectural agenda involves a dual obligation: a heightened respect for both the traditions of the past and the conditions of the future. A second area of concern involves the definition of our relevant constituencies. With whom should we be communicating? The answer is increasingly complex. The architectural community has been expanding beyond the creative core of professional architects. The list of players is long: planners and managers, engineers and financiers, researchers and educators, computer scientists and social scientists, designers and craftsmen, political and civic leaders, clients and consultants. More players mean more variables to consider. Not only creative designs, but also client directives, the adaptability of building types and materials, allowed expenditures, the indigenous climate, rural versus urban settings, and of course, the immediate cultural context. We must be aware, for example, that Islamic populations are intermingled more and more among peoples of other backgrounds. When I think of the diversified players in the architectural community, I am reminded of the impatient client who wrote to his architect, awaiting plans, if good, check will follow. To which the wise architect, of course, replied, awaiting check, if good, plans will follow. Indeed, it takes a wonderful mix of patience and impatience to achieve architectural success. In the end, significant progress will require the effective interplay of all constituent groups. The success of each is diminished when any of them lags in concern or in competence. As we define our constituencies more inclusively, we can help raise architectural awareness across a wider spectrum of stakeholders. A third area of growing concern is the shifting social and economic scene. People are living longer. Rural populations are urbanizing, and economies are diversifying, making complex demands on the built environment. This is why societal evolution has become a stronger preoccupation for our nominating juries. The fact that an industrial complex, for the first time, is one of our award winners tonight is welcome evidence of this growing recognition. The nature of the award is to help shape best practices for the built environment of Muslims and their neighbors. Our mandate must therefore include a wide range of architectural settings, not only mosques, museums, and monuments, but also schools and hospitals, industrial spaces and public markets, parks and thoroughfares, and of course, a variety of residential habitats. Similarly, our geographical focus must be more inclusive. For centuries, most of our important buildings have been located in capital cities. But recent population growth has concentrated in what I would call secondary cities, often neglected by the global spotlight, but in need of intelligent planning. The same thing is true in rural settings, which have often been left to a self-build process, receiving little best practice attention. This too is a situation which the award process can help redress as we adapt to social realities. Fourth and finally, let me point to the revolutionary impact of new technologies. Clearly, a relevant architectural conversation these days requires a considerable degree of technological sophistication as we encounter a constant flow of new materials, new techniques, and new requirements. Among other things, new technologies can help us address growing environmental urgencies. I think, for example, of the pressing need for energy and water conservation, and of the risks associated with climate change, weather extremes, and geological instability. Used alertly and intelligently, new technologies can help us cope with bewildering environmental challenges. These, then, are four of the major concerns that I would submit for further discussion. What does architectural excellence mean in the context of Islamic traditions and aspirations? How do we reach a wider array of constituents? Can we expand our social and economic relevance? And how do we best employ innovative technologies? These concerns, of course, will lead us to further questions. How and where do we teach about architecture? How can we anticipate and occasionally help steer the processes of change? How do we best reward and learn from those who are most successful? How can we share our lessons with others outside the Ummah? In addressing all these issues, I believe we can indeed make our continuing conversation more relevant and more productive, remembering always the Quranic commandment that humankind must take responsibility for shaping and reshaping our earthly environment, employing Allah's gifts of time and talent as good stewards of His creation. Thank you.
May I now invite His Highness the Emir and Her Highness Sheikh Abouza to join His Highness the Aga Khan to present the certificates to the award recipients.
For thousands of years, the Wadi Hanifa has supported settlements along its length. One of those settlements became the Saudi capital, Riyadh. But in the 1970s, the city began to neglect the oasis that gave it life.
What happened the last 4 decades, because of this drastic change in the city of Riyadh and the very fast growth, pressure was put on Wadi Hanifa. A lot of quarrying activities, illegal dumping of materials, medical waste. The environment of the Wadi was so deteriorated.
In 2001, the Riyadh Development Authority responded with an ambitious plan to save the Wadi. One major challenge was to persuade the choked waterway to start flowing again. But this was only half the battle. The water also needed to be cleaned.
We decided to mimic nature and to create a food chain, an aquatic food chain that would actually bioaccumulate all these excess nutrients, and then we would harvest the top predator, which was a tilapia. We were actually producing water that's clean enough to grow food for human consumption.
And farmers aren't the only ones to have benefited.
All kinds of people, Saudis, non-Saudis, are visiting the Wadi every day. The whole Wadi is becoming the grand park of the city.
I hadn't seen the full extent of the development until I was involved in the jury. So for me as a resident in Riyadh, that was a very happy surprise.
Wadi Hanifa Wetlands, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Dr. Abdul Latif bin Abdul Malik Al-Sheikh, President, Riyadh Development Authority. Mr. George Stockton, President, Mariama Shiva Palace Limited. Mr. Roderick MacDonald, Chairman, Borough Board.
Famed for its ancient Medina, the city of Tunis also boasts some fine examples of more recent architecture.
Nous avons un grand échantillonnage de bâtiments très intéressants qui va du 19e au 20e siècle et nous avons des exemples que peut-être dans la métropole il n'existait pas parce que au fait les architectes ils avaient plus de courage d'innover dans les colonies, ce qu'ils ne pouvaient pas faire en métropole.
It would be a mistake to think of modernity as something that was brought from Europe to the Muslim world. Modernity was invented and tested and created all throughout the world, and the Muslim world was a site for experimentation for modernity.
In the decades following Tunisia's independence, colonial-era buildings were neglected, in part because they symbolized the power of the old regime. But in 1998, the Association de Sauvegarde de la Médina de Tunis turned its attention to the city's more recent heritage, including the Rossini Palace and the magnificent Théâtre Municipal. Meanwhile, some 60,000 square meters of public spaces have been revitalized.
Il y a eu une réconciliation entre les habitants de Tunis et leur ville.
Revitalization of the Ipeker of Tunis, Tunisia. Mr. Belgachem Sassouki, Deputy Mayor of Tunis. Ms. Samia General Manager, Association de Sauvegarde de la Médina de Tunis. Mr. Zubair Mouli, Deputy Director, Association de Sauvegarde de la Médina de Tunis. Mrs. Faika Bejoy, Deputy Director, Association de Sauvegarde de la Médina de Tunis.
Unearthed only 100 years ago, Madinat Al-Zahra in southern Spain is one of the most significant Islamic archaeological sites in the world. Having won a competition to design a museum for the site, architects Nieto Sobejano were loath to overshadow the ruins with their own construction.
It's very impressive when you go to the site. You look downwards and you see this beautiful landscape, but also you see the growth of the city of Cordoba coming towards Medina Zahra. So for us it was a challenge not to contribute any more to that disorder.
The question was how could we do that if we needed big space for the new museum, the new research center, the place for the archaeologists. The answer at the end was easy. We'll build under the earth.
Core 10 steel and white concrete give the museum a rough utilitarian feel. At the same time, the building incorporates elements of traditional Islamic architecture, recalling the Madinat itself.
I was struck by the force of the message of this architectural work, which is so humble in the way in which it sees itself as serving primarily the archaeological site, and at the same time being so eloquent in expressing how Islam is something that emanates from the soil of Spain and Europe and is not this foreign culture or spirit being imposed on it.
Madinat Al-Zahra Museum, Cordoba, Spain. Mr. Antonio Vallejo Triano, Director of the Archaeological Site of Madinat Al-Zahra. Ms. Fuensanta Nieto, Nieto Sobejano Architects. Mr. Enrique Sobejano, Nieto Sobejano Architects. His Excellency Paulino Plata-Canovas, Minister of Culture of Andalusia.
The Ipeker textile factory in Turkey is a marked contrast to most industrial buildings in the country.
Ipeker is
a very interesting project. It's a beautifully designed building, but more importantly, it has taken a logical understanding that if you want to make money, then your workers are part of that formula.
From the outset, architect Emre Aralat was determined to break with typical factory design.
I think that factories are like jails. Conventional factories are like jails because only people go inside and then work and work and work. At the beginning, we discussed with the owner if we will make another jail for some workers to make you lots of money. I'm not with this project.
Aralat's most important innovation was to gather workers and administrators under a single roof. Large windows, high ceilings, a stylish cafeteria, and outdoor sports facilities also contribute to staff quality of life.
Ipeker Textile Factory, Edirne, Turkey. Mr. Yalçın Ayadin, Chairman of Ipeker Giyim Sanayi. Mr. Emre Aralat, Emre Aralat Architects.
The tiny village of Shashi in China's remote Fujian province is dominated by a pair of circular castles, or toulots, one on either side of a creek. When he came to design a new school for the village, architect Li Xiaodong found inspiration in the history and position of the toulots.
200-300 years ago, there were two families. Across a creek, they were rivals with each other. And I think that story inspires me to make a bridge, to make a linkage between the two families.
Li Xiaodong's simple yet radical bridge design consists of a steel framework encased in a skin of locally grown wood. With playful features including a built-in slide, the school has certainly scored a hit with its main target users.
很好，给学生小朋友带来很多乐趣，有很好玩的地方。
But the building isn't just for the children of Shashi. True to its name, it also serves as a bridge with a zigzagging walkway suspended beneath the classrooms. At night, the school transforms into a public library. On special occasions, it can even function as a theatre. And the benefits to the community go far beyond the building itself.
For the Chinese side, for the Chinese architecture, I think it's a message that we should not just stick to our own tradition. We should look into the other world.
Bridge School, Shashi Village in Fujian Province, China. Mr. Hong Lishuan, County Leader of Ningbo County. Mr. Li Xiaodong Atelier.
Since 1980, the Aga Khan Award for Architecture has incorporated a separate award for lifetime achievement in furthering understanding of architecture in Muslim societies. The recipient of this year's Chairman's Award is Oleg Grabar, Professor Emeritus at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. Professor Grabar's research has had a profound influence on the study of Islamic art and architecture worldwide, and his teaching has inspired many of the leading figures in the field today.
He's become a great model as a mentor, and so those of us who have subsequently mentored other people have done it in his example.
He's introduced us to new issues that had not been studied before, at meanings, not just formal compositions, and he made us think of how we relate to our past.
I can't think of another scholar
that's had a more important impact over generations on the study of Islamic art and architecture than Oleg Grabar.
The 2010 Chairman's Award of the Aga Khan Award for Architecture is presented to Professor Oleg Grabar.